came from the mud. There's dirt on my hands. Strong like a tree. There's roots where I stand. Oh, I've been running from the law.
Welcome to the 2020 International Female Ride Day. This is a panel with a bunch of women that ride, and we've chosen women that represent many different corners of the world. My name is Marion Redpath. I am the rentals manager at Calgary Harley-Davidson, and I would like to just give a little brief introduction to myself, and then I'm going to move through our panel members and ask for them to provide an introduction to themselves as well. First of all, I guess my experience on motorcycles started at a very young age. I vividly remember a family reunion where my father and my uncle got lost and ended up making a detour on the way to the family reunion, and they bought us a mini bike. So my cousins and myself had this mini bike to ride around at this family reunion, and I vividly remember that it had no brakes, and we all wore the bottoms of our shoes off that summer riding that mini bike. Very fond memories. And then I progressed lived in the country, and so we had dirt bikes and various things like that when I was growing up. And then I met my husband. He was riding at the time, and I rode behind him for several years. And the catalyst for me to get my own was really when my husband and I rode from Southern Ontario in Canada to Milwaukee to the 90th anniversary of Harley-Davidson, and that was in '93. And I noticed a bunch of other ladies riding, and I thought, geez, why am I not riding my own? This is crazy. And so I commented to my husband that the next time we come back to the 95th anniversary, I will be riding my own, and I was. My first ride was Harley-Davidson Sportster 883. I rode that for several years, and then I moved on to the Softail. I love the Softail. It's really my ride of choice. So that's a little brief introduction to me. I'd like to turn it over to our panel. So I'm going to start with Heather to start with. And Heather, just please give us a little bit of introduction to you and who you are and what you're riding now and how you got into all of this.
Definitely. So I'm Heather Matthews-Majerick. I've been riding for 35 years, racing for 33 years. I got into riding because of my parents. My mother raced professionally as a motocrosser, and my dad raced in the desert. All of their family rode motorcycles, my grandparents, my cousins, all of it. We would have big Thanksgivings in the desert where we all would ride together. It was just something we all did for fun. And I started out on a three-wheeler, which most of them are illegal now, but back then it was safe. Then I moved on to a 50cc mini bike. And I grew up and I went to a 60cc, 80cc, 125, and then a 250. I've ridden both 2-strokes and 4-strokes. It's just the displacement's different. But the bike that I prefer is my 125. I've been on it the longest. I like how it responds, which is what I use for racing. I also have my street license where I use my 250cc dual sport. So that's a little about me.
Thanks, Heather. We're going to move on now to Raven.
Hi, everyone. My name is Samara Raven. Everyone calls me Raven. I started to ride bikes 12 years ago already. And it's really strange because nobody in my family likes motorbikes or cars. I think my dad likes a little bit cars, but nobody ever had motorbikes. I don't know where this came from. I know I always like speed. I always like cars and motorbikes. I have been a real petrol head since I was a child. So before racing bikes, I was racing cars, and I was telling always to my mom, please buy me a motorbike, please buy me a motorbike. And of course she didn't want to. So as soon as I started to work, I saved my money, and one day I came back home and I was like, Mom, I already have my bike. I started with a 250cc. It was a small, those kind of really rubbish Chinese bike, but I really love it. I really, really love that bike. It took me everywhere. And then in some point, I really have that need to have more power. So that's when I bought my sport bike, 600cc, and I started to race. I was traveling, I was in circuit, and I started racing drag race. It was amazing. I always loved motorbikes. I think it's something I will never leave. And right now I have a street bike, an 800cc. And of course, coming soon, I want to have like a bike to race, probably to come back to drag race. And also I want, like one of my dream bikes is of course a night road of Harley-Davidson. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Thanks, Raven. We're going to move on to Kat from Calgary Harley.
Kat it's right out at and just saw how rad it was, all these women getting together and just having an absolute time. It just looks so and bought it right now. I've got a 14 Dyna Street Bob and a 2019 Fat Boy 114. So I have a blast kind of jumping on everything, and I just absolutely love the community that's kind of exposed me to. I've met phenomenal people left, right, and center, and really I just get incredibly excited about new people that I get to meet, people I get to introduce into the community. Especially now working for Harley, I do meet a lot of new people that are jumping into riding, meet a lot of women that are getting into it or changing from brands. Just this year, I kind of started helping out with the leaders more aggressively and organizing the season. This season's gone a little haywire, but we're looking at some alternative options to really get the stoke going for riding and the women community here in Calgary.
Thanks, Kat. Now we're going to move on to Barbara.
Hello, everybody. My name is Barbara Fava. I'm Italian and specialize in stunt riding. I think that my earliest photo on a bike was 1.5 years. And then the first one, electric bike, arrived when I was 3 years old. And then the first serious one was a 125cc motocross bike. And that was the beginning of my end. Like my dad was desperate, and little I knew back then that my career would have been made of big stunt bikes. My last one was a 600cc before leaving Mexico to relocate back to Europe, which will be probably my next bike as well. And into freestyle motocross, I am into 250cc. So that's it. And my dad for sure has been a huge inspiration to me for riding because he's a rider as well. He's not a professional, but he has been influencing me a lot. And of course, right now it runs into the family because I'm getting inspired every day by my fiance, who's a vice world champion in freestyle motocross. And I mean, this is how my life is made. I became also a professional announcer for several freestyle motocross and extreme motorsports events. And I think my biggest achievement up to now is that I'm the official voice of the MXGP of Asia.
Thanks, Barbara. Okay, now we're going to move on to our local Harley-Davidson HOG, Harley Owners Group Director, Anne.
Hey everyone, I'm Anne Bowler. I am the director for the Calgary HOG chapter here in Calgary, Alberta. My name is Harley-Davidson. I have been involved in motorcycles probably since I was about 15, 16 years old. We rode some mini bikes, everything from snowmobiles to quads, ATVs, you name it. If it had wheels, we rode it. I never actually got my own license until 2014. I came home one day and my husband surprised me with my own motorcycle. back in 2013, right at the cusp of winter, where I wasn't able to ride it. So I got to stare at my brand new to me 2007 Harley-Davidson lowrider. And if I was able to keep that bike, I would have kept it, because I think everybody should have one for each hand. But I traded in a couple of years ago, and now I ride a 2018 Street Glide.
Thanks, Anne. Okay, now last but not least, we're going to move on to Micaela.
Hi, everybody. My name is Micaela Wallace, and I currently live in Edmonton, Alberta. Like yourself, Marion, I grew up in the country and was exposed to mini bikes and dirt bikes as a kid. Although my family didn't really participate, it was just my brother and I that enjoyed the motorsports. Moving on from there, my dad bought us scooters, and we were about 14 years old. We ripped around on the scooters through Lake Louise in the summers, etc. And that was kind of it. I moved on in my life, went to school, and fast forward to about 6 years ago, when I first started dating my now husband, who was an avid motorcycle rider. I rode on the back of his Harley probably 3 times and went out and bought my own. My first bike was a Sportster Nightster 1200cc. I had no idea if I could ride it or not, so I called him and said, hey, are you busy? Can you come and pick this motorcycle up and drive it home for me? And from there, he took me to a parking lot, and I got on it. Kind of all came back to me right away, and I've never looked back since. I rode that bike for 2 years, and then I jumped right up to a Street Glide. I bought a 2017, I think, Street Glide Special, and rode that for another 2 years. And then I got the curse of the high performance motorcycle when I rode a CVO Street Glide that Harley Canada had lent me for a press tour out in Eastern Canada and the US. And I came back and I got on my Street Glide and was like, it's not fast enough, it's not powerful enough. And the next thing I knew, I was building my own version of a CVO, which was a 2019 Street Glide Special with a stage 4 performance kit put on it to give it the equivalent cubic inches of a CVO. So still riding that today. It's like my absolute dream bike. But I do still have my original Sportster, which is actually currently with Calgary Harley-Davidson's Customs Group. Eric Sum and his team are working on a surprise-ish build of the bike, and it should be done in the next month or so, which I'm really excited to see. Along that journey, I met a really incredible network of women riders, which inspired me to found my project called Rebelle Moto, which is really all about connecting with inspirational women who ride and sharing their stories in hopes to inspire others. And it's led me all across Canada and the US. And last year, it actually led me overseas to Germany, the Netherlands, and Russia, where I spent 2 weeks riding out there.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Micaela. All right, moving on to our next question. I want to hear from each panel member, what is your most memorable ride? I'll give you an example of my most memorable ride, and it was many, many years ago, and we rode from southwestern Ontario all the way to Sturgis, South Dakota, and we were on our way back, and this was before we had Google Maps and before we had GPSs and all of those wonderful things, so working with good old maps. And the road that we had selected, we did not realize did not have very many fuel stations. And I was riding a little Sportster 883 with a very small tank. And I ran out of fuel several times in North Dakota. The wind was horrible. And just to give you an idea of how strong the wind was, it pulled 3 of our bikes in our group off of the kickstands and knocked them over. That's how big the wind was. So for us, it was not so great day. It was a very frustrating day with the bikes falling over and me running out of fuel and them having to siphon fuel out of their tanks into mine and all of that. But now looking back on it, it was certainly a good story. So that's my story. I'm going to move on to the rest of you, and let's start with Heather again.
All right. So I've had so many different experiences through my life of motorcycles. It's hard to pick one, but I narrowed it down. My most memorable ride, I would start with my mom and I. We go out riding and training together all the time when I was on my mini bike and she was on her big bike. But it only rains 2 weeks of the year here in Southern California, and it's far and in between. And so when it would rain, the puddles would happen in our training area. And so we had this game where we'd have our dirt bikes facing each other, and then we'd act like the gate dropped and we'd race towards each other, towards the puddle. And I always thought that I could, on my little 50cc, have this huge wave come and just cover my mom. That never happened. But hers would cover me, no problem. So it was just always so fun when my mom's getting me soaking wet and freezing. But the enjoyment of it between a mother and a daughter, it was just a huge trait. I would also say about a few years later, racing in the stadium at Supercross. I got to do that for 2 whole years, traveling across the country. My favorite memory was always walking down the tunnel into the track and seeing all the 70,000 people, and they'd cheer for you, because at that time I was the only girl who did it. So whenever they'd say Heather, it would just, the boys had no chance. So the butterflies it gave, I love giving that experience to girls. And then taking my daughter out for her first ride on a motorcycle. I put her on the gas tank of my bike and we rode around in circles. And just to hear her squeal and giggle was the best feeling ever. There was a little boy in our circle on a quad, and she would just scream, faster, faster, you have to catch him, you have to pass him. And just that whole time with her was amazing. Those are my best memories of being on a motorcycle.
Thanks, Heather. Great stories. Let's move on to Raven.
I think my most memorable ride was last year, actually. I have been riding for a long time, but last year we traveled from London to Italy. We went through, it was 2 weeks of riding. It was amazing. I love it. First day, it was very nice. Second day, it was raining in Switzerland. We arrived late, dark. We couldn't see nothing of the road. The next day, it was raining the whole day, cold, super, super cold. And then we went through a lot of places of Italy. We traveled to Cinque Terre, we went to Bologna. I bothered my boyfriend because I really wanted to go to Tavuglia, to Valentino Rossi place. So we went to Tavuglia and then we went to Bologna. And on the way back, we always wanted to do Passo di Stelvio and Passo di Gavia. That are the, like, you have to cross the Alps. I am afraid of heights. So for me, that was like, it was amazing. It was scary. It was like, something I had to do in some point of my life. I was so scared every time we were looking to the maps before. I was like, oh my God, how the hell am I supposed to do that? I'm from Mexico, so I grew up in Mexico City and another place where we don't have those kind of mountains, of course. So I am not used to riding those kind of roads, but at the end it was amazing. I made it. When I get at the top of Passo di Gavia and Passo di Stelvio, I was like, I made it. I made it, and all my friends were with me. My boyfriend was super happy. He supported me a lot. And at the end, even if I was shaking, my legs were trembling, and I made it. So I think that's one of the facts, because I love it so much. The experience was amazing. The road is amazing. So I think that's my most memorable ride, because I managed to put on aside my fear of heights and actually do it and say, you know what, whatever it happens, it happened. Let's just go for it. So yeah, that's my most memorable ride.
Great story. I love the overcoming the fear. I'm sure all of us can relate to that at some point in our life, pushing our limits. But that's part of the excitement. Let's move on to Kat.
It has to be one of the toughest questions. I love absolutely every ride that I get to go out on. I'm very lucky. I have a really great crew of people that I ride with, and each and every week I end up meeting new people, which is a real big highlight for me. I just love the experience of being introduced to new people, and then you kind of create your own network. As far as exact rides, to be quite honest, when I started at Harley, I was riding a Sportster and I had never been on anything bigger. So when I was sent out on my first solo demo ride, I was given 3 young 20s guys that were a little bit throttle happy and pretty much out for a joyride. And we were racing around trying to find a bike for me. It was busy. One bike was out of gas. The other one wasn't ready. So the only thing I could take out was a road glide with a 114. And just so you guys know, 114 is just under 1900 cc's. And my Sportster was 1200 cc's. So it was a bit of a jump. But they put me out there. They just kind of told me if I can't ride this, I can't sell bikes. So no pressure. But yeah, I went on this road, got the guys completely lost, didn't know the demo route, just went for a cruise. And I just, same thing, overcame an obstacle that I didn't know I could do, and the comfort level of jumping on a bigger bike and not killing these young kids that just wanted to go out for a rip. So that was something that definitely sticks out. And then my first bike ever, when I bought the 750, that was a bike I bought and had to ride on a really rainy day. That terrified the crap out of me because I had to go about 40 kilometers in very unpleasant rainy weather in the Rocky Mountains because I lived in Banff. And I was very happy to make it home and had a cup of water in each boot. So that was a one to remember. But yeah, I look forward to more memories every day.
Thanks, Kat. Okay, we're going to move on to Barbara.
Okay, so because of my specialty, my field, I can't really talk about a long ride because, as you know, stunt bikes are not made to long rides, neither but I have 2 special memories. And one is related to freestyle motocross when I did my first backflip in tandem 2 years ago with the Czech rider Petr Pilat. We decided just let's go and do it. And I remember that I was right in front of the ramp a few seconds before hitting the gas. I was the only thing that I was able to think it was why I'm doing this. But then I was so satisfied with myself when we landed it that was really an experience for a life. And then the second one, it was back in 2016, I think, in the Mexico City Autodrome, Hermanos Rodriguez. I was invited to do a stunt show with my colleagues, but it was really, really raining a lot, and it was really, really slippery. But they were telling me, don't go, Barbara, because doing stunts in tandem in this condition is not really safe. But then I thought about how many people actually paid the ticket to come and see me also as well. So I remember that I stepped into the track and I heard literally the people coming up, standing up and clapping their hands because they saw that I decided to ride. And we made it, we did the tricks, everything went fine, everything was smooth. And seeing the people actually appreciating me for what for me was the step between overcoming my fears and starting to trust myself more in my capacities was absolutely somewhere forever.
Great stuff. I must admit, I really have admiration for the people that do the tricks. I'm certainly more of a street riding girl. All right, we're going to move on to Anne, our director of HOG.
So I guess, like everybody else, I have plenty of favorite rides and scary rides. Our favorite ride so far to date is in 2015, we went down to Sturgis for the 75th anniversary. So we planned to go for 11 days. We left Calgary, headed down to Montana, and found the best Mexican restaurant ever in Gillette, Wyoming. Ended up at Sturgis, spent a couple of days there with some great friends, did some great riding. got to experience the Needles Highway and just everything about Sturgis. We left our friends from there and went across to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and then headed straight up north through North Dakota, where I almost ran out of gas going into Fargo. And I can speak to Marion about the winds there, because I know at one point I was looking for a nice ditch to crash into so that I could get a ride home the rest of the way by ambulance, because I was exhausted. We ended up going to Winnipeg, so we did that in 2 days. So that was a long haul. I was in charge of planning the trip, and somehow at some point the miles flipped from kilometers to miles, which there's a big difference. So I thought our route was planned in kilometers, but it was actually in miles. So it made for very, very long days. And we stayed with some friends for a couple of days in Winnipeg, and then came back across the prairies to Calgary. So I think that was the most memorable. We had about 15 minutes of rain in 11 days on a bike trip. So I think that's a record. We've had other trips where we've gone as far as Cranbrook, BC, and come back for the 2 days with the chapter. And we've come back through rain, snow, sleet, hail. And I'm sure some of the people that were with me when they hear this know that I constantly complain about the hail and the snow that we hit that trip. But it's still memories, and it makes me think about all the people that I was with and all the rides I've taken. Probably my most favorite trip is any trip I take with my grandson. So I look forward to when the next one's big enough to ride with us.
Excellent. Thanks, Anne. And let's move over to Micaela and hear your story.
So this is a real hard question, especially when you're into touring and you get to see the world on two wheels in different places, because it's all really impactful and memorable. So I think in the spirit of International Female Ride Day, I'm going to share my favorite experience riding in seeing a new rider kind of accomplish goals. And I have now a very good friend of mine. Her name is MC, originally from Quebec, but lives in Edmonton. And she had purchased a Sportster 72 in August. So she had a very small riding window to really get into it, but she got hooked. You could see it in her face. Like she wanted to ride every day, constantly messaging, let's go out. So over the winter, I said, why don't we plan a road trip to go moto camping for May long weekend of next year? And we'll get a small group of women together, and we'll support you in, getting comfortable going on a long distance trip. So we helped her figure out how to pack her bike, what kind of supplies she needed, and had this great trip to Montana planned. But in true prairie fashion, the weather hit, and there was just no way that we could possibly ride down to Montana. So last minute change of plans was going up to the Northwest Territories. That was the only direction where it wasn't going to be pouring rain. So there was, I think, 6 of us that went in total. There's 2 roads in, that's it, all the way up to Hay River in the Northwest Territories. We rode through 80-kilometer-an-hour crosswinds. We rode in areas where we were pushing 400 kilometers with no gas stations, and we had a variety of motorcycles with us. And when we made it to Hay River, the forest fires hit, and we had to ride back through forest fires. All roads closed except one. We had to wear masks because of smoke inhalation. One of the places where we had to camp, we were forced to camp overnight in a field because we had no access to anything. The power went out, therefore the gas stations wouldn't pump. So we had to specifically figure out between jerry cans and distance and riding back and forth to support each other how we were going to get out of there. But by the time we got back to Edmonton, seeing the look on MC's face, not only did she just do her first moto camping road trip, she rode through 80-kilometer-an-hour crosswinds, forest fires, like all the things that lots of people will never even experience in their entire riding career. And just seeing the confidence and the excitement come for the passion was something really memorable for me.
Awesome. Wow. I can't imagine riding through a forest fire. Wow. All right. Moving on to our next question for the panel. Have you encountered any barriers as a female rider, and how did you overcome them? I have a brief little story. It's not really a barrier, but it's an example of some of the I don't know if you would call it prejudice, but it's certainly the inexperience of some members of the motorcycle community at seeing a woman ride. Now, we go back quite a few years for this story, but our sons, we used to take them, each of us would take a son with us on the motorcycles behind us. And we went to this farm to go look at these puppies. And when we got there, we parked the bikes at the end of the driveway for the farm, and we're walking in, and this old fella, he was a good old boy, and he is walking down the path and in front of us, and he turns and he says to my husband, he says, "One of the young ones riding that other bike?" And anyway, my husband said, "No, that's my wife. My wife is riding the other bike." And this guy, he just starts shaking his head, and he's walking down the path in front of us, and he's shaking his head. "A woman riding a Harley, a woman riding a Harley." And he's just shaking his head at this whole thing. And so now that's our standing joke between my husband and myself. If ever we see a woman riding down the road, we always go, shake our heads, "A woman riding a Harley." Anyway, that's my little story. Not really a barrier, but just kind of a funny story of some of the things that we experience that a man would not experience as being a rider. So let's start with Heather again for your story of what barriers you've encountered as a female rider and how did you overcome them?
As motocross has only been around for about 50 years, for women a lot less. But there's been a lot of barriers, and my mom's generation was a lot worse than my generation. My daughter's generation was way better than both of ours were. But some of the barriers I had as a female rider were I've had dads tell their sons to take me out, crash me. They've tried to disable my bikes. They protest me. Spectators block me on the track. They hold my bike so I can't go anywhere. There's been so much. But meanwhile, the sons' moms were cheering me on to go and beat their sons. So that was always kind of funny. But it was sad that the dads would be so mad at their sons that they would lose to a girl. And these attitudes didn't help their families or mine. They didn't even help grow the sport. Also, when it came to women's racing, we would only have one class, and that was women's. There was no skill separation like there was with the men's class. So you could be a 7-year-old slow, just learning to ride on a mini bike, trying to win against the top pros of the day on 250cc dirt bikes. Obviously, that was a huge disadvantage. You're slow, not jumping, while the pros are trying not to land on you and race their races, because sometimes they had money, sometimes they didn't, but the skill levels were so different that it was very disheartening for the sport to overcome these barriers. So as I got faster, I could leave the boys in the dust. I would park away from those that complained because we all parked together in one big dirt lot. I would go to sign up early before anyone got there, so you wouldn't hear that with all the trash talking. I would stay in my trailer. I wouldn't go out and socialize. I mentally prepare myself for the day, all alone in my trailer. I also, during the races, I'd make friends with the photographer at the track, and in between races, I'd help them prepare their film to put in the viewfinders. So I was out of sight of the boys as well, but I was learning a trade. Years later, I started a group called WMN Racing to promote women's motocross, where we offer multiple skill levels to separate out the women's classes. So it's fairer for all. We offer 10+ classes for all skills and age groups while growing the sport. And I also take photos of every girl that races with us. So they have a memory to take home with them for free. They also have a shot at a trophy, which that was really hard when I was younger, much appreciated today. So it just grows the sport. So I've had a lot of highs and lows.
Wow. That's all I can say is wow. Excellent, excellent story, and way to go for overcoming those barriers. Okay, let's move on to Raven.
I think the same as Heather. I think kind of one of my barriers was always to compete against men. So because of what I like, I have always been surrounded by boys. And I like cars, bikes, American football. So I always was around boys, and I was more like a tomboy all the time, like a very tough and badass girl. But still, when I start to race, most of all drag race, I usually don't wear any pink color, any purple things around me. So actually, I was looking like a small boy racing. Everything was black. The bike was black. My helmet, everything. Only my jacket was saying Raven. But you couldn't see if I actually was a girl or a boy, because my suit was actually a friend of mine. He lent me his suit. So every time I was racing, at the end they were saying, "Oh my God, yeah, the only girl racing in this championship," and the guys were just going nuts, like screaming, like shouting at me, "Why? I cannot believe a woman is winning to me. How can no? Is the bike is fixed?" And I was like, my bike was like almost stuck in that time. I was just racing with passion, and I really like it. I was enjoying it. So I was like, whatever, you know what? I never even got bothered about it. I was just laughing about it, and I was like, you know what? I really don't mind. There's always, I think, as a woman, there's always this kind of guys. There's always men around you that wants to make you feel bad, that want to push you down and be like, you know what? You are a woman, and you shouldn't be doing this. This is for men. You shouldn't be racing. You are not fast enough. You are not strong enough. You cannot do it. But at the end, I have always done it, and I proved them wrong. And I proved them I could win, I could race, I could do it, and I could be faster. So yeah, I think that was one of the barriers always. And at the end, well, I always have super cool friends around me, men friends that were always supporting me. They never have to be like defending me or anything else, because I really I was like this kind of tomboy girl. So I was like, you know what? I could even fight with you if I want to, but I don't care. It's just, I think we always are going to find this kind of man that doesn't like to be a girl, look a girl being like in a motorbike and I don't know, be a tough girl, be a badass girl. They don't like it. So I just laugh about them.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Raven. That was great, and good for you for overcoming those barriers. All right, let's move on to Kat.
Well, after hearing those stories, I've had it pretty lucky. When I started biking, I didn't really have anyone to ride with, so I was just always riding on myself or with myself, and no one really pointed fingers. I always had my red hair flapping in the back and just did my own thing. I did have an encounter in a shop once that was a little bit unexpected, and I didn't really appreciate how they were treating me. But as far as the course that I took, I then got into another shop and met some other female mechanics. And so I've always just had a pocket of really amazing people to just always be with as far as bike related things and get through the community. I've been really, really lucky being introduced to people that are just really welcoming, and they never assume that you don't know anything. They are open to teaching and, seeing people progress in the industry. So really I've lucked out. I'd say most of the barriers that I've seen are actually working here at Harley-Davidson. I get asked all the time, "Oh, do you ride or do you just sell these?" So it's always kind of fun to actually explain to them that I can ride, that I've ridden a good number of the bikes, and a lot of them are on smaller bikes. So it just, it's how it is sometimes. But, it's really not, I haven't had big issues as far as people pointing me out as a woman. At the end of the day, I really don't care.
Good for you. All right, let's move on to Barbara.
Well, my story, being in stunt riding in Mexico, is maybe Raven can relate to that. The stunt community over there is wild, and in Mexico, there are still some problems with what's so-called machismo, because they see a woman, and she was mentioning that she was racing, and she was basically disguising herself with black, outfits and black helmet. And for me, it was not like that, because we don't wear leather protection and so on. So I was there, and it was a woman on a 600cc, and people were like, "Oh no, you can't ride that. That's too much power for a woman." I was like, "Why? I can go to buy tortillas with this one if I want." And then it was the same when I decided to step into freestyle motocross. How many doors I've been slammed onto my face stating this is not a sport for women. And who says that? And now there are the same people that are cheering me, when they see me in my events, and I'm like, it's a little bit weird. But on the other side, I'm really, proud, and I'm thankful. I want to say thank to all these people that for years have been telling me, you can't do that, you're not strong enough, you can't stunt, you can't flip, you can't wheelie, you can't do whatever thing, because those are the people that not only they motivate me to do more and to overcome my limits, because I've been pushing a lot my limits. Sometimes I've been also pushing my skin on the surface of autodromes for that, but I'm also aware that we started something, and it's called inspiring the new generations. I've been witnessing with my eyes a lot of girls starting to approaching more stunts in Mexico, a lot of girls starting to be more passionate about freestyle motocross, and starting to, they send me messages, and they're like, "Oh, I bought my first motocross bike, and I'm here doing wheelies in the street of Tijuana." So it means that's something we're doing right. And for all these gentlemen, just sit over there and watch the show, enjoy it. Watch me doing. Straighten my crown and watch for it.
Straighten your crown. I love it. Okay, let's move on to Anne.
I've been very fortunate. I've had a very positive influence riding my own motorcycle. I rode on the back of my husband's for many years. And when I did start riding my own, it was a lot of fun when I'd have a carload of women pull up beside me and go, "Oh, I love your bike," or, "Oh, that's really cool. You're a girl." And even I've had truck drivers stop at a red light and say, "Hey, that's awesome," seeing, a woman riding. So I think we're at an age now where it is very socially acceptable to have female riders. We had a very positive influence too through our Hog chapter with so many female riders, and it's growing. And the women, watching them go out and get their licenses and join our LOH, our Ladies of Harley, it's fantastic. So being in a very positive environment, I think it just makes it that much more fun.
Thanks, Anne. Okay, Micaela, you're up.
All right. So similar to Anne and Kat in Canada, my barriers have been fairly minimal. I didn't really see a lot until I built my current bike with this Stage 4 performance kit, and I'd always get a lot of "Whoa, are you sure you should ride something that big?" And I'm like, "Going bigger next time, guys." And, to be honest with you, I learned how to ride from men through my husband's friends and his riding community. And I mean, they would take me out and practice with me, and it was a really positive experience. Last fall, when I went to Russia with my friend Bailey, that's really where I started to see that it's not acceptable or normal or encouraged worldwide. And I knew that going into it, but I wasn't sure what the level of the barrier was going to be like in Russia. And we connected with the Hog chapter over there, and they were fantastic to us, very welcoming, showed us all around. And when we diverted from that group, and we're just two women in Moscow at this point, 12 million people, don't speak the language, no clue where we're going, what we're doing. But after talking to people, we started to find out where the motorcycle hangouts were. So to get content for you know, our article and social, we wanted to go to those locations. And once the hog group left us and we met everybody else that rides in Russia, in Moscow, that's when we started to see that everyone would come over and were really interested in us. And we were on brand new, a Road Glide and an FXR. So flashy, big bikes, clearly not Russian, very different style. And, you know, our normal response when they would come and talk through Google Translate is, you know, do you want to go for a ride? And that's when we saw the men saying no. And I would challenge back saying, like, we can ride. I promise you, we're capable, like, we can do this. And they would say, no, we can't be seen riding with a woman. And so that's when I was like, oh, it's like that. And, you know, saw only a handful of women riders in the locations we were at in Russia. But hopefully through meeting us and learning more about Rebelle Moto and what we do, maybe we were able to change a little bit of minds. And for Heather and Raven and Barbara, as soon as COVID's over, call us and we will come and talk to your friends.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Micaela. Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed this time together, but we have come to the end of our time. And yeah, that's right, Barbara. And I would just like to thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your day today to chat with us. I think it's very important that we as women celebrate, and I love it that we have a day to celebrate International Female Riding Day. And thanks again to the folks in the background that have helped us out to put this together. We have Paco, our marketing manager, and we have Sean Parker from Glean. And we just wish everyone well and safe riding out there. Have a great night.
I came from the mud. There's dirt on my